for coming. My name is Harriet Jones. I'm the business reporter for WNPR, Connecticut Public Radio, and I'm delighted to have been asked to host this evening's event. So, on behalf of the town of Groton, the Groton Public Library, Connecticut Humanities, the Smithsonian Institution, Southeastern Connecticut Cultural Coalition, and our sponsor, the Day newspaper, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the grand opening ceremony for The Way We Worked. It's an exhibition created by the Smithsonian celebrating 130 years of American work life. The Way We Worked is just one part of a larger entity, Connecticut at Work, which is a year-long conversation about the past, the present, and the future of American work life and work in Connecticut, which was created by Connecticut Humanities. The exhibition has toured all throughout the state in the past year, and this is its final stop here in Groton, so we're very pleased to have it here in Southeastern Connecticut. We have great speakers for you here this evening. You'll hear from them in just a moment. But at this time, I'd ask that you all rise, please. And we'll hear from the United States Coast Guard Band Woodwind Quintet, who will open our program with the national anthem. The United States Coast Guard Band Woodwind Quintet, and I would just say the band and all its various ensembles are just a wonderful world-class cultural resource that we have here. We're very lucky to have them in this part of the state. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our very first speaker, the Mayor of the town of Groton, the Honourable Rita M. Schmidt.
Thank you. Thank you. I see a lot of former mayors here, and it's very exciting to have everyone together. We are welcoming you all to the Groton Library, which is really outstanding part of the community. It offers so much to all of the citizens, and we're pleased to be able to take part in it. When I first came to Connecticut from South Dakota, it was my first job, and I first started working here. So this is very poignant for me. Connecticut was certainly started by the culture of the Native Americans, and then the Pilgrims came. We had farmers, we had fishermen, we had pirates, we had factories, and the story of how we worked is going to be very dramatic, and I hope that you'll all stay and enjoy what we have to offer here. We're very indebted to the Smithsonian for this wonderful exhibit. Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mayor Schmidt. Now to tell us more about the Connecticut Humanities Initiative, Connecticut at Work, please welcome Scott Wands of the Connecticut Humanities.
Well, thank you very much, Harriet, and thank you all for coming out tonight. On behalf of everyone at Connecticut Humanities, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be down in Groton tonight to open The Way We Worked. As part of our year-long initiative looking at work in Connecticut. Connecticut Humanities is the statewide affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we help communities tell their stories, past, present, and future. And with this exhibit, we've traveled it around. It started in New Haven back in December of last year, And we're finishing up, I think, in one of the best venues that we've had across the state. You're really in for a treat tonight. The work that Betty Ann Reiter has done here at Groton Public Library, and Wendy Burry, our coordinator from the Southeastern Cultural Coalition, as well as the sponsorship from the day, has made a special evening. I don't want to take away from any of them. I just want to say how pleased we are, and you're in for a treat. Thank you.
Our next speaker earned his PhD from the University of Connecticut and is the Robert G. Albion Historian at Mystic Seaport. He's a visiting scholar at Yukon Avery Point, where he teaches history. He's also served as the Smithsonian Institution lecturer and as a visiting instructor at Trinity College and Connecticut College. His many publications have involved maritime commerce, seafaring culture, and history. He's here to throw some light on the historical aspects of work in Connecticut. Please welcome Dr. Glenn Gordinier.
Thank you, Harriet, for the kind introduction. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the Smithsonian Institution, Connecticut Humanities, the Public Library. It's just a pleasure and a very pleasant surprise, I must admit, to see so many faces. This is just a wonderful turnout. So let me talk a little bit about work in southeastern Connecticut and in the historical context. I might approach it the way a realtor would approach it: location, location, location. This particular location that so many of us love and appreciate, work in this location, this part of the state, has always been sort of bracketed by the natural setting and what that meant for workers. Workers in the fields, in the forests, on the sea. And we can perhaps look at those three elements of the work experience and the work setting to get a sense of the work histories of southeastern Connecticut. In the fields, Yankee farmers, which they weren't Iowan farmers, they weren't from Ohio, they were here in New London County. I live in Stonington, Connecticut, an aptly named community. In Groton, it's not much different. There are just a lot of rocks here. And so you weren't going to turn over hundreds of acres for wheat or for corn, but you could grow small patches of those sort of things. You could grow garden produce, or you could leave your land in pasture and in woodlots. And so it was from pasture lands that many of the products came out of the farms of southeastern Connecticut. And I'm reminded, actually, I go back just 35 years when I lived in what used to be known many years ago as the North Parish of Groton, now known as Ledyard. 2 doors down was the local dairy farmer, Earl Lamb. And my wife and I used to go down to Mr. Lamb's farm and get raw milk. And I remember one afternoon standing in his dooryard as we picked up our allotment of milk, and we had a small conversation. And one of the things he said was, "This land is too hard on a man." And we had known him some time, and it was obvious that that land had what they would have said in the old days had broken him up. Earl Lamb was a dairy farmer, so it was a 7-day-a-week project. There's no turning the cows back. And he worked that land 7 days a week with a cane in each hand. That land had worn him out. It was too hard on a man. And he was living proof of that. And so we find farmers largely doing small crops and livestock. In the old days, it would have been horses and cattle and mules and oxen, geese, chickens, things like that. And then they would have sent them off to the market, perhaps to New York City, perhaps to the Caribbean. Vessels sailing out of the Thames River 150, 200 years ago were known as horse jockeys because they carried livestock. If you were a farmer in Lebanon or Uncasville or Norwich, the outer stretches of Norwich, you would bring your small creatures into Norwich, and vessels would go up the river, and those animals, pigs and such, would board there. The larger animals would be herded down the river and straight down State Street in New London, down to the wharves where that same vessel would meet the large livestock downriver, and then out past Montauk Point, out into the Atlantic marketplace. So the sea and the farm came together, and we see that happening in our history. Seafarers, of course, we all know this was a seafaring region. We had our sealers. One of our local sealers discovered Antarctica. They'd hit so many seals on the head, he had to keep going south, and there was this new continent. We had merchant seamen who traveled the oceans of the world, the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, the Pacific. And of course, our whalers that traveled the world as well, sailing out of Mystic and Stonington and New London most particularly. Then fishermen who still are sailing out of the Thames River in Stonington Harbor today. So all of these seafarers were part of our story as well. And they in many cases linked the farm and the sea. I haven't spoken yet about forests because, of course, timber products were also sent to sea. Some might be firewood heading up Long Island Sound on a single mast or a two-masted schooner for the New York market, for warming homes or heating in the growing industrial base of New York City. Or much more likely it would have been Southeastern Connecticut timber that went to sea, not in vessels, but of vessels. The timbers of these many hundreds and hundreds of vessels launched here were made of local timber. And so off that timber would go, denuding the hillsides of southeastern Connecticut. But that was good, honest work. And we can talk about those vessels launched in the Thames River, launched on the Mystic River, launched on the Pawcatuck, traveling the oceans of the world. Mystic particularly well known, as I'm sure you're all aware. There was a term that sailors around the world knew. Mystic built was a term that meant a well-found vessel, meaning well-designed, made of the finest materials and the finest craftsmanship. Mystic vessels were well-found. And this reputation here was well-found as well. So we have field, we have forest, we have the sea. Another thing we might mention is what they would have called in the old days Yankee ingenuity. There was certainly enough of that to go around, which has grown into the industries of today. But it was visible in the maritime industries back in the 19th and early 20th centuries as well. One of the first ironclads ever built was built on the Mystic River. USS Galena was something Mystic took great pride in. Then we have the Western Rig draggers that were designed on the Thames River and the Mystic River by local fishermen and boat builders. And the Western Rig dragger with a pilot house forward, the work deck aft, is something that you see all around the world today. Not necessarily that we influenced the world, but we certainly did influence ship design, fishing design in our region. And then, of course, if we want to talk about ingenuity, we have electric boat. The first of the world's nuclear submarines, not just ingenious, audacious perhaps, traveling under the North Pole. No one quite knew how that was going to work out. Turned out it worked out very well. And so we all are safer for the ingenuity, the audacity of those who man those boats, those who build those boats. So it's a long tradition of field, forest, the sea, and good old Yankee ingenuity. That's all part of our past. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Glenn. I'd just add it's been an amazing thing to see some of those traditions kept alive by your own institution this summer with the resurrection of the Morgan, which was just a wonderful event. So we go from the past and we come now to the present. Our next speaker has been helping large commercial and industrial businesses improve their bottom lines for over 30 years, working in energy efficiency since 1982, and in economic development and commercial real estate since 1992, he's consistently sought creative solutions for difficult problems. He's a member of the Board of Directors of Southeastern Connecticut Cultural Coalition, a member of the Board of Directors of the Southeastern Connecticut Enterprise Region, and the President of the Norwich Community Development Corporation. Please welcome Bob Mills.
Thank you, Harriet. Yeah, I do have the distinct pleasure of being the transition between the past and the future. And I got to tell you, that is a challenge. I do spend my day in economic development, a term that we think of as trying to drive wealth and prosperity into the community to help people and businesses. And I spend my days working with businesses. And so in seeing the roster of the speakers tonight, I thought I better just stick to the knitting and stick to what I know and what I've been working on instead of trying to really go after a lot of research and a lot of stuff like these guys are doing. This is beautiful stuff. And so what I'm going to talk about tonight is really just three things. A focus on real estate and what's going on in real estate markets today. A focus on the economy and what's going on in the economy today. And then I have a few personal observations of things that I think are really impacting the way we work, the way we live, and what's going on in the world. And so I think the first thing is that in real estate, there's far less demand for office space today than there has ever been. In just as recently as 2010, the average office space was 225 square feet. Currently, the demand, the average across the nation for office space is about 176 square feet, 225, 176. And if you look down the road just a little ways, say 5 or 10 years out, it could be under 100 square feet per office space. Why is that? What's going on? Well, there's a higher percentage of workers that are not working in the office. A great deal of people are working from home and from other places, and so they don't actually have to show up into a space. In some businesses, that's as high as 70% of the workforce never even shows up to the office. The second thing is that the standard office material, desks, chairs, and all that stuff, are going away. Stand-up desks, very much like this podium, are all the rage now. So this occupies a lot less space than somebody's big desk. That's a big change. It's a change in the real estate market and the way we need to look at the demands. And then one of the more interesting things is that with the economy and what's been happening with workforce, there's been a lot of layoffs of a lot of highly skilled, very talented people. And those people, having left big corporations, are really primed to start entrepreneurial enterprises today. And they are oftentimes renting office space like you would join a gym. They don't occupy a space for a year. They join for a year. And they join and they show up and they get a space, they get a desk, they get a place to work, whatever's available. So it's like going to the gym and using the treadmill, or whatever treadmill's available you get. And that's the kind of thing that entrepreneurs are experiencing today. Second big trend is there's a huge demand for both data centers and for distribution. And you can all kind of imagine what's going on there. Fulfillment centers, when you call somebody, and even somebody you know and trust, Sears or JCPenney's, most of the time your products come from a fulfillment center, not from the bricks and mortar store that you're familiar with. Along those lines, Amazon just recently announced that they are locating a very large distribution center in Connecticut. And that interesting fact about how that works is Amazon is not concerned about square feet. They're concerned about cubic inches. They rent space out to their customers by the cubic inch. And that, that's this fulfillment center of the future. It really is transforming the way we have to think about what we're doing. Right down the road from where Amazon has announced that they're going to site a facility is a Walgreens distribution center. It's 700,000 square feet big. It's also 10 stories tall. But it's only a single story, but it just happens to be 10 stories tall. And one of the more interesting things about that is that it's about 70% automated. Robots go down, not tracks, but they just go down the center aisles. There's sensors in the floor. And they'll pick product from all through the location. And the product can be in one location today, in a different location tomorrow, in a different part of the building the next day. It's all remembered by a computer and drops into bins. And then probably, for me, the single most interesting fact is that they are using mentally handicapped folks to do the balance of most of the work. So a lot of automation, and then a segment of the workforce that hasn't had an opportunity to work in a good long time. Both of those things are leading to a huge demand in data centers. Data centers are where all of the computers reside that feed your Amazon orders and actually your bookkeeping and everything that you do today is in the cloud. it's a little strange term for a lot of folks, but it all goes up into the cloud and it comes back down and it resides in these data centers. And they are growing exponentially. The demand for data centers is one of the hottest commodities in the real estate market today. Interesting tidbits. Let's move on to the economy. I have a few things to relate to you about what's going on in the economy today. And as it relates to the workforce. First of all, when we measure the economy in jobs, and recently we've been in a 5 or 6 or 26-year lull, I'm not sure how long, the lows are deeper than they have been. Each cycle, the economy is very much a cyclic kind of thing, and the lows are lower than before. Jobs are shed at a greater rate, and when the jobs start coming back, they come back much slower over time, and the same jobs don't come back. This last cycle, 75% of the jobs that were lost will never come back. There are not jobs that exist that will be filled. They'll have to be reinvented, new kinds of jobs, a lot of the kinds of things that I just spoke about. And so the change, every time we go into one of these cycles, there's a huge structural change in the job economy. And so you can imagine that it's going to get harder and harder and harder every time we go through one of these things. It takes longer to get out of as well. And one of the things that's exacerbating that now is that there is more capital available in the marketplace today for a number of reasons. One, because interest rates are so low, and so keeping the capital in the bank doesn't make any sense any longer. So investment is happening every day into technology and to new upgraded equipment, and it's usually at the cost of some workforce. It's supplanting technology where there once was a workforce. And it's happened more and more and more. And the hard part is that it happens usually at the lower end of the job scale. And so our lowest paid workers are the ones that frequently get left behind. But the economy is starting to come back, but it's doing it without the workforce. And so that's why you've heard in the past the jobless recovery. The recovery is coming back, but it's unfortunately it's not bringing a lot of jobs with it. And then my final observations for you are just personal things that I've kind of noticed. And I think it's interesting that we have a teenscape over here next to us. The young workforce today doesn't go to work for the sake of work, and employment is not really the key term any longer. The average worker coming into the workforce today will have about 30 jobs over their career. How many jobs have you had? It's just amazing how many jobs they'll go through. And they're in it for the richness and the quality of the work experience rather than the reward of being paid at the end of the day. Second observation that I had is that retailers are having a hard time figuring out how to connect with the teens in the marketplace. And obviously, everybody's got a cell phone. Teens, even at the age of 3 and 4, have cell phones today. And so marketing through digital technology is the standard. It's just choosing which app is the right app. Because different segments of the society use different apps. And so if you're over 25, and I think the preponderance of the group is over 25, you probably won't know any of this stuff. But Google Ads doesn't cut it for the teen marketplace. Pinterest and Tumblr are no longer of any interest to the teens. Facebook is the first app that really makes any sense to teens, but it's not the best or biggest. One that you may not even have heard of before, Pinterest, beats out Facebook and all the others combined in the marketplace. But Twitter is outpaced by Facebook. But the grand winner for how to reach teens in the marketplace, if you happen to be a retailer, any guess? I heard it. Instagram. So go home tonight and ask your grandchildren or your children, how the heck do you work Instagram? Because that's how you're going to reach them. All right, and my last observation is that, and it's interesting what you see in the displays here tonight, but today there are 6 generations living on the planet at the same time right now. 6 generations living together, 4 generations working in the workplace together. That's never really happened before. And of those 4, each has a different style of preferred communication. Not the same, they're all different. So any of you that's older than I am in the room, you probably would prefer to communicate through writing. I know that's how my father likes to do it. He still sends me letters. I haven't sent him a letter in I don't know how long. If you're a baby boomer like me, you probably like to get on the phone. And if you're a Gen Xer, you probably like to use email. But the one that's the most frustrating for most of us is if you're a millennial, you probably will be doing everything by texting. And it makes management in the workplace very difficult, all these different styles. So with that, you kind of now know everything I know that I spend my days doing, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what the future brings, but I would like an opportunity to opt out of the workforce here someday in the not too distant future. So maybe Scott can help us with that. Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you, Bob. As the mother of a 13-year-old who is constantly looking at sneakers on Instagram, I can attest to the truth of what you say. So our final speaker this evening has strong roots in Southeastern Connecticut. He grew up in Mystic as the son of a Coast Guard officer. He now lives with his family in Stonington. He's traveled all over the world, though, for the Center for National Policy in Washington, D.C., going to hotspots like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kosovo. But no matter where his travels take him, he always returns home, where he demonstrates his strong belief in community service. He served as the president of the board of Stonington Community Center, on the Stonington Police Commission, on the Strategic Planning Committee of Lawrence Memorial Hospital, on the board of the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation, and the Southeastern Connecticut Water Authority Advisory Board. We're glad you have time to be here this evening. To address the future of work in Connecticut, please welcome Scott Bates.
Well, thank you very much, Harriet. And this is amazing. What a crowd on a Friday night. And congratulations to the coalition, to Wendy, and to everybody that's put this amazing program together. I'm standing between you and the refreshments, so I will try to be brief. We're talking about the future of work, and I represent it in a small way, I suppose. 2 things I'd share with you. One is that I believe our strength in this region is our history and our heritage, as we were just talking about. Our challenge, though, is going to be how we connect with the wider world. Now, I grew up in Mystic, and when I was a kid, and even as an adult, I can say, I'd say, oh, yeah, I'm from Mystic. Somebody, oh, me too. And I'd say, what side of the river? And they'd say, Groton. I said, oh, you're not really from Mystic. That is our, yes, thank you. That's our parochial nature here. We are very proud, of our little hamlets and our burgs, and that allowed us to defeat the British Empire, and it allowed us to carve out a life out of this hard scrabble land. But in today's world, it can also be a handicap, where I think it's a strength. And a personal story that led me to my career is right after 9/11, I was doing work in Kosovo for the U.S., helping their government get on its feet after their war. And 9/11 happened while I was in Kosovo. And I told the people I worked for, send me to Afghanistan the second that we take it, and I want to do something. So, but before coming to that decision, I came home for Christmas in 2001, and there was a young man from Stonington Borough that was killed in 9/11. And there was a makeshift monument to him on Stonington Point. And I was there, and I was trying to decide, do I go to Afghanistan or not? And I was scared. My dad was in the Coast Guard. He was a great example to me. And I went to Stonington Point, because that's where I go to make hard decisions. I realized that after many years, I kept going home. I was working in Washington and overseas, but whenever I had a life decision, I came home. I went down to Stonington Point, I looked out on the ocean, and I said, well, the men of Stonington have always gone out into the world when they needed to. And so I decided to go to Afghanistan. And that led to 24 trips to the Middle East after moving back here. In 2005, I'd met my wife by then. She was a U.S. diplomat. I took her home to Stonington. It didn't take much convincing. She had worked at the White House. I was working on Capitol Hill, but we came back here in 2005, and I traded my job on the Hill for working at a think tank. And I went to the head of the think tank, who was a 9/11 commissioner. I knew him from that work. I said, Tim, I'd like to work for you. And he said, how much do you make? And I told him, and he said, I can pay you half that. And I said, you'll have half my time. So I moved here, and it allowed me flexibility. I'd go to D.C. a few times a month for a few days. At a think tank, I could do my work from home. I could actually think more clearly than being in Washington, D.C., about the challenges we have as a nation. And to supplement my half income and to accomplish a sense of mission and purpose, I did 24 trips to the Middle East during the last few years to work on governance assistance missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. So now I'm president of the Center for National Policy, which is a think tank that mostly looks at how we meet the next generation of national security challenges. But we're a networked think tank. We have 1,400 young leaders across the country that we get their ideas. They're in 14 cities around the country. And we see that as the way that we connect with the wider world. It's not just experts housed in Washington, D.C. And what that work has taught me is that for our kids to have a shot to live here, for us to continue to prosper or, frankly, get moving again, because we're stagnant right now in many ways in this part of the world, we must play in the global marketplace. We must capture markets. We must engage globally, nationally, and find more ways to do that. We can't be complacent any further. So how can we do that? How can we achieve that? I think a couple ways. What we're living through in this time period now is unparalleled in human history. The connectivity that we have, the information that is available to everyone that wasn't available even 25 years ago, has brought us all together. It's an incredibly small world. But that means we're competing. My son, who's 8, has to compete not with somebody from South Carolina, but somebody from Bangalore and Shanghai in the future. So we need a couple things to be relevant in the 21st century, to be able to continue to chart our destiny, much like we have for 300 years in this region. And I would say there are a couple things. One is communications. So I go on TV I do my work in Washington half the time virtually. I need high-speed internet. I do interviews by Skype. I'm on Chinese and French TV talking about American national security. I can do that from Stonington, Connecticut. I need to be able to have a good transportation network. I fly out of Providence, which is only 35 minutes away. I took the train today up from D.C., and, it's a matter of professional life and death. If I can be connected to the people I work with, I have to be, moving around pretty consistently. So we need better transportation networks. Do you know this part of the state gets about 2% of the state budget for transportation? Unacceptable. We're a cul-de-sac right now. We have to do better, or we'll be cut off. And any expert will tell you that's what's happening right now to this part of the state. We're getting cut off of the transportation networks. We need to be linked in. We need to be a place where people that want to go work in New York can take them an hour and a half instead of 3 hours to get to New York. They can come back home in the evening. You could actually commute. And the third piece of this I'd say would be education. And it's hard here because I go to my town budget meetings, and people don't want to pay any more taxes, understandably, because our wages are stagnant. But guess what? Our kids don't have any chance if they don't get the best education possible, and we can't attract the companies that we need if we don't have world-class education here, because they can choose from anywhere in the United States to locate their bases. So that's a hard dilemma. But we have to think hard about it. We have to make the sacrifices to really invest in public education in all of our towns. So the future of work, Bob, I'd say that your expertise that you've built up, you can market it regionally, nationally. You can be based here. You'll have to go out into the world like I'd look out from Stonington Point and say the men of Stonington and the women have gone out into the world for generations, and we must do that as well to make sure that we can continue to live the life that we love and to chart our destiny for years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Well, I'd like to mention that as well as this exhibition that we're just about to get to see, there are about 40 events taking place around the region. They actually began in September, they run through December. They're all centered on the theme of work. There's art exhibitions, panel discussions, book discussions, music events, and more. So if you'd like to find one of those, if you'd like to take part in any of those, you can see a full list of those regional events on the Southeastern Connecticut Cultural Coalition's website, www.culturesect.org. culturesect.org. Well, it's almost time to cut the ribbon, to open the exhibition, but before that, this kind of thing doesn't just happen. So there's a list of people to thank here. So we've got to make sure that we don't miss anybody. We need to say thank you to the sponsor of Connecticut at Work in Southeastern Connecticut, that's the Day newspaper, to Connecticut Humanities, to the steering committee for the regional coordination, that's Betty Ann Reiter of Groton Public Library, Wendy Berry of Southeastern Connecticut Cultural Coalition, Kristen Clark, the town of Groton, who's a board member of the Cultural Coalition, Ken Megan, board member of the Southeastern Cultural Coalition also, Julie Menders from Otis Library, board member also of the Cultural Coalition, Mystic Seaport, who are the installers of the exhibit, and also the Town Public Works Department, who helped with the installation, the staff of the Groton Public Library, Groton's town historian, James L. Street, and Barbara Nagy for creating exhibits about Groton at Work. You can see some of those over there. Tonight's speakers, Glenn Gordinier, Bob Mills, and Scott Bates, the U.S. Coast Guard Band Woodwind Quintet for this evening's music, and the L.T. Grasso Technical High School Culinary Arts Department for this evening's refreshments. Thank you to all of those people. And now we have a list of people who are going to come help us cut the ribbon. Rita Schmidt, Betty Ann Reiter, Wendy Berry, Scott Wands. If you'd like to come up and help us get this thing started.